This is The Premise, and I'm your host,
Chad Thompson. Chad Thompson's the host.
I'm the host. I'm Jeniffer Thompson.
And I'm Chad Thompson, the host.
Today on The Premise, we are speaking with best-selling author Lisa C., whose books include Snowflower and the Secret Fan, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, Peony in Love, and China Dolls, to name just a few. Her books have been translated in 39 countries, and Amy Tan said this about Snowflower: achingly beautiful, a marvel of imagination. And I can't agree more. Lisa, your latest book, The Island of Sea Women, will be available in paperback on March 10th this year. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So your work traditionally explores Chinese characters and culture. And I know your great-grandfather, Fang Xi, was a Chinese American in LA's Chinatown, which was the impetus for your first book on Gold Mountain, The 100-Year Odyssey of My Chinese American Family, published to great success in 1995. At what point did you know that you would reconstruct your family history and tell this story?
Oh, I never thought I was going to do that, actually. So, people had been approaching my family truly for about 100 years to write a magazine article or a book or even a movie script. And always my family had said no. And there were a couple of reasons for this. On the one hand, I think they had a lot of, they were kind of arrogant, like, oh, why should we participate in their project? But on the other side of it, there was a lot of shame and embarrassment in the family, about things that had happened in the past, things that were illegal, for example, like bigamy, smuggling, and things like that. So
I heard there was a kidnapping in there somewhere,
and a kidnapping too, and a lot, and love affairs, and people dying, and all those kinds of things that in your family you don't necessarily want to talk about at all, let alone share with the world. And then I guess it would have to be something like 30 years ago, a woman named Ruth Ann Lum McCunn. She was a very good writer of Chinese American history, and she called me and wanted to include our family on a book that she was doing on prominent Chinese American families. And I called my great aunt, and she said, no, never. We don't participate in things like that. And then 2 years later, my great aunt turned 80, and I gave her, and the book had just come out, that book, and I gave it to her for her birthday. And the next day, her daughter called and said, my mom realizes she made a mistake. Why don't you come over? She has some stories she wants to tell you. And that first day, I learned things I had never heard before. And so it just really went from there. But I have to say, even then, I thought, maybe this will be one of those Christmas letters that people send out, that I would just have like one page where it has the dates and the names and the places that I could send just to the family. And obviously things got out of hand because and then I ended up doing a couple of magazine articles, and I thought, I'm done. No, that just one thing kind of led to another. And 5 years later, there was a book.
You can't just open up those floodgates and expect to dam it back up again.
No.
Totally.
No.
And you were working as a freelance journalist, and I think you worked for Publishers Weekly at the time. Is that right?
Right. I was the West Coast correspondent for Publishers Weekly, which meant that I covered everything in publishing west of the Mississippi. And so for those of the people listening who don't know, Publishers Weekly is the trade journal of the publishing industry. So I was interviewing authors and doing news stories, and actually at that time covering this explosive growth of publishing in the West, particularly here in California.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense that, your work is so deeply rooted in research coming from the journalistic side of writing.
That's absolutely true. And, and how you learn to ask questions, and how you learn to interview people, and how you learn to get to those sensitive subjects, like you brought up the kidnapping. This was something I had to work into over about 2 years before I was actually able to get people to talk about it. So,
Interesting. With your aunt.
that journalistic background that I had was and still to this day invaluable, because I'm often interviewing people who have gone through a lot.
Yeah.
In the island of Sea Women, these are the free divers from an island called Jeju off the tip of South Korea. And while their work is fascinating and that whole culture is fascinating, and people they really want to share that experience and talk about it, but the island itself has some very dark history. And so it's difficult to talk to people about those times because they don't necessarily want to relive it. But what I have learned over the years is that, and you might feel the same way just even in your own life, that we don't necessarily dwell on the happy times, but we do remember everything when something awful happens.
Goes wrong.
If there's
That's right.
if there's an illness in the family, or someone dies, or somebody's at war, any of those kinds of things, terrible arguments and divorces, you can remember blow by blow by blow and who said what and what people were wearing, because since they're so awful and since we don't like to talk about them, I think in many ways we remember all of those details because we're playing them over and over and over again in our heads.
Which is one of the reasons I think that, memoir is doing so well these days, is because we're looking for something that mirrors our own life, that makes us feel like we're not alone. I'm not the only one who had tragedy in my life.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think that that's limited to memoir. I think that's also true in just even fiction in general. I mean, obviously there's a lot of fiction where it's, a thriller or a murder mystery or a sci-fi where it's kind of escapism in a certain way.
Absolutely.
Shopaholic books, those kinds of things. But I think with what we call more literary fiction, that why those books resonate so much with us is that we do connect to those characters and think about, what would I do in that situation? Or, yes, I too lost my mother, or, I too went through this, and that we connect through the fictional story to those very things that have happened in our own lives, but also that we can place ourselves in situations that maybe we haven't experienced.
You write tragedy so well.
Okay.
but I want to say
I guess that's a compliment.
Well, no,
I don't know.
But in that tragedy, there's so much beauty, even in your most heartbreaking moments. Can you speak to the process that you use to place yourself in the room with your characters and bring them to life so fully?
Well, you actually said the very phrase that is what I'd always tell myself, which is to place myself in the room. And I don't want to be outside looking in. I want to be in the room experiencing these things with the characters. That means, though, that since I'm the writer, I know what's coming. And I know pretty far in advance what's coming. And so starting sometimes, as much as 2 months out, I'm already kind of preparing myself emotionally for going to that place. And I know where I'm going and I know what's going to happen, but my poor characters don't. And I think that's, for me, the hardest part. I remember there was one book, Shanghai Girls, and there's a character who's named Sam who commits suicide. And starting 2 months out, I did everything I could to change his destiny. I loved him so much. I mean, he's really one of my favorite characters in all of my books. And I tried everything. I mean, really everything I could to save his life. But he had his own destiny, and that was really, it's almost outside of me. And so when the time came, there I was with him, and it is emotionally hard.
Sure.
I wrote about these women writers in the Yangtze Delta in the mid-17th century, all women, in Peony and Love. And this was a huge group of women writers, more women writers being published in this one area of China than altogether in the rest of the world at that time. And they had this belief of you have to cut to the bone to write. And I really believe that that's true, that what writers are doing is they're trying to, they are cutting to the bone, but it's your own bones, that you have to go deep inside of yourself to find or search for, I guess is the better way to put it, the truth of relationships, the truth of emotions. And sometimes it's just, it's not like it's physically hard. It's not like laying asphalt in the desert, but it is emotionally hard and hard to walk away from, at the end of the day, at the end of the workday.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about your writing process. Do you have a daily routine?
First I have to have some good tea, and that's really important for me before I start anything.
I love having tea when I write. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am a bit of a tea snob, and so it's what kind of tea I'm going to drink on any particular day. It takes a lot of thought and brewing and all of that, and that sort of gets me ready to sit down to work. Truthfully, I will look at my email and look at Twitter and look at Instagram and sort of get some of that stuff out of the way first, just because it's, lurking in the background if I don't. And then I start to write. And when I'm writing, I do 1,000 words a day, which is just 4 pages. I try to work 5 days a week when I'm writing, but actually, books for me take about 2 years. And for me, because of the kinds of books that I write, the research takes the longest amount of time by far, and the writing is the least amount of time, with editing somewhere in the middle. So if you think about, usually my books are somewhere around 440 pages in the first draft. And at 4 pages a day, that's what, like 110 days-ish. Wow. And so out of 2 years, that's not very much. So when I actually think about the writing, there is the actual writing, but to me, it's much bigger, and it really is about the research. It's about daydreaming. I spend so much time just kind of staring into the middle distance and trying to think about, well, what's going to happen next? If this happened, what if? Yeah. What if?
I agree. I have a writing coach, and she has a saying that says, staring out the window counts. It counts for a lot. And that's that time of, staring into that distance to imagine it. That's awesome. I want to know about your research too. And actually, before I go there, I'm a bit of a tea snob myself. So tell me what your favorite, are you a loose leaf kind of gal? And are you big on the temperature of the water? Tell me more about your tea.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes to both. So, I have always been a tea drinker, but when I wrote The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, that just turned me into a tea snob, and I'm proud of it.
Nice.
So I'd say, so that book I was writing very specifically about pu'er tea, and I probably have maybe 50 types of pu'er, and some of it is in bricks, some of it is loose. I have some tea that's from a single 1,000-year-old tree. I have some that is raw. I really love the raw pu'er, especially in the morning. It's it's very light and kind of astringent. I think of it as being grassy, and I just
Totally.
love that in the
Yeah.
morning. I just find it very like it perks me up and wakes me up and gets me set for the day. And then
Yeah.
as the day goes on, I like to drink pu'er that's older and aged and darker in color. The raw pu'er kind of looks like a Chenin Blanc, and the aged pu'er looks more like a black cup of coffee. So it's a real range in the color and the taste and all of that. I also love Iron Goddess of Mercy, and there's a particular man in the Feng Sun tea market in Guangzhou where I get it, and then I also am able to get a true jasmine tea. So jasmine tea, I'd say something like 99% of all the jasmine tea in the world is just tea that's been sprayed with jasmine oil. But real jasmine tea, what they do is they have these piles of tea, and then they come in and put about a ton of unopened jasmine blossoms on top of the tea, leave it overnight, and then over the next 3 days, as the blossoms open, people come in and pick those off. And then they do that 9 more times. So it's a month-long process where the tea leaves are just being infused with the scent of these opening jasmine blossoms. And you can only get it at a certain time of year. And obviously, not very many people make it. And it's expensive.
It's probably really expensive. Yeah.
It's expensive. And so, but I sort of feel like, well, I don't have many other vices. So this is it. This is it.
It's not a bad vice.
When, I have a big birthday coming up or something like that, I'll tell my husband, which tea I'd like him to get for me.
I imagine that you visited quite a few Chinese tea houses in the research that you did.
Yes. And also, met some really serious tea connoisseurs and collectors here. So I get to still do that, in Los Angeles.
In Chinatown, too, there's some really beautiful tea houses there.
Yeah, but also, there are just different places where you can go. So it's pretty fascinating. And I think of it,
it's a whole culture,
a lot like the wine. People who love wine, they go to wine tastings, and they talk about the terroir and the scent of apricot. Well, all of that can be applied to tea as well. It's actually a pretty similar lingo.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah. So our company, Monkey See Media, used to be next door to a tea shop here in San Diego, and that's where Chad and I really developed an understanding of tea, and we didn't realize how good tea could be. So now, the sacrilege of the tea bag, the Tazo tea bag.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm in a restaurant, I'll ask them what kind of tea they have, and then who made it, what's the brand, and then I'll say, just bring me hot water. I'll just have the hot water.
Never mind. Yeah.
Not just hot water, but 205-degree water.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, that might be a little much to ask in a restaurant, but
I guess it depends on the restaurant. So, I think that, writing routines, they need this thing that puts us in that state of mind. And I can see how having the right cup of tea would really lend itself to getting into that state of mind, into that comfort space, even if it is staring out the window. So I love that picture. Let's talk a little bit about your research process, if you don't mind.
Anything in particular? Or just how I do it, how I approach it?
Yeah, how you approach it and how you keep it all straight. And I know you share quite a bit of the research on your website.
I do.
Which is really beautiful. When you're gathering out, there's so many places you can start. And I'm just curious if you have a process or if it's different every time.
No, it actually follows a pretty similar process. So I do think about stories for a very long time before I start writing them. So like Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, I thought about that for 20 years. Island of Sea Women, 10 years. The new book that I'm working, 26 years. Now, of course, this works for me now because I'm a lot older. When I was younger, I wasn't waiting 26 years. But
Right.
I still do, even that, even if I think about my first book, it was something, knowing the family and always hearing those stories. It's not that I thought, oh, I'm the one who could do it, but it is something that I had thought about a long time. And I think that's part of why that first book took 5 years, was I had to sort of think in the ways that I do now over a longer period of time. So let's just take the Island of Sea Women as an example. So about 10 years ago, I was sitting in a doctor's office, and how you sit there and you're flipping through magazines, and I saw this tiny article, one paragraph, one small photo of these diving women. And I just thought, this is so incredible. I tore it out of the magazine and took it home. And yes,
You're one
I'm
of those
that person.
people.
So when next time you're in the doctor's office and you're like, what happened to this magazine? You'll know the answer. And I've got it somewhere. And
some researcher somewhere has it. Yeah.
And so then it's on my radar, and over the next, I'd say about 8 years, every once in a while, something would sort of pass by and I'd grab it. Sometimes that happens a lot. There's some ideas that I've had where, let's just say, I'd have like a foot high of material collected. And sometimes I have a piece of paper and that's it. But everything in between until I decide, okay, this is the one. And then when I decide that, I live very close to UCLA. I go to the research library there. I look on the internet to see what I can find. You don't have to be very careful with the internet, but nevertheless, even if you look on something like Wikipedia, you can look down in the sources, and that will tell you articles and dissertations and books. And then in some cases, I'm able to track down the writers of those things. With the Island of Sea Women, there's an English language newspaper on the island, and there was one woman in particular who seemed to have a lot of articles about the diving women. And one day I just wrote to her, sent her an email, and she ended up, and it turned out she's the actually official ambassador of the Henyo, the diving women, to the rest of the world. She's been appointed by the governor.
Wait a minute, the diving women have an ambassador?
Yeah, they have their own. But I mean, it's not like a real ambassador, not a real ambassador, but they give her that honorary title. And
sure.
so when I went there, she arranged interviews. She took me to see the Grand Shaman. She introduced me to the governor. She took me to meet different scholars. So one person like that can open a lot of doors. Anyway, so I do all of that research as much as I can before I go on the research trip. And then when I go, some things have been set up in advance, like the things that Ann Hilty, that's that woman's name, had set up for me. But I also, those were sort of more official type interviews, but I also had set up interviews with particular women who were divers. And so those interviews, they lasted, 2 to 8 hours. They were in people's homes. It was a very intimate experience and much more in depth. But I also did 2 other things. One was to go where women were going into the sea and where they were in the morning and where they were coming back in the afternoon. And so at both of those times, they're working, but nevertheless, I would say, oh, can I talk to you? And sometimes these women are very direct. They're very loud because they've been under the sea for a long time, so their ears aren't so great, so they're quite loud. And sometimes I'd say, can I talk to you? And they'd be like, no, go away. And then other times they'd say, sure, sit down. I'm just getting my tools ready, but yes, I'll talk to you for a few minutes. Or
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
sorting sea urchins, and sit down and and then sometimes those would last 5 minutes, and sometimes they'd last about 20, and then they'd say, okay, I'm busy now. I've got to just work. So there were those, and then there was this other category of women, and these women are semi-retired, fully retired. Maybe they're recovering from an injury, and they're in their late 80s, typically late 80s, early 90s. And they sit on the beach and gather and sort the seaweed and algae that's washed ashore overnight. And so I would just walk up to them and again, say, can we talk for a while? And same thing, I'm busy, go away, or sure, sit down. And some of those interviews were my absolute favorites. And I loved that experience so much that that's the opening scene of the book. I mean, I had not necessarily intended to have a modern day, any of the book be in, I mean, it's actually 2008, but we'll just say now.
Right.
But I had just loved that so much. And the experience of talking to them, the way they viewed the environment around them. I mean, the way they were so aware of everything happening all around them. And I think that's partly because they've had a lifetime under the sea where you have to use, really your peripheral vision to make sure nothing's coming up to eat you.
Right,
you
yeah.
have to be so hyper aware under the sea and doing this very dangerous work. And even, retired, semi-retired, they have that. And so how they were, they might be talking to me, but they were also aware of the people who were up on the road, or, some women who were 30 feet away, and what were they doing and who were they talking to, and just so aware of all of that. So I just was so impressed with them, and I really just loved them so much. And one other thing, which was I did have 4 different translators on that trip.
I was just going to ask that, yeah.
Yeah, so on the days that I was on the beach, I had a young woman. She was a university student, and just, very smart, so helpful. She was just fantastic. And I won't say this happened with every single woman, but I will say 9 out of 10. There would come a moment when they would say to her, oh, could you hold your cell phone next to my ear? I need to call my son, my nephew, my grandson. You're so pretty, and he's looking for a wife. I just love that so much. So that's in the opening scene of the book.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Your books
and then just lastly, just for the research. So then I come home, and now I do an even deeper dive into research, because now I've learned this, all this new stuff. So I had the first round, before I go on the research trip. Then I do the research trip, and then when I come back, it's even deeper. And that research actually continues all the way through, truly like to the last page. So an example of that was these women historically would do itinerant work. So they would go to dive and young, like 15 years old, would be gone for 6 to 9 months out of the year, diving off the coast of China, Japan, mainland Korea, but also off the coast of Vladivostok in winter. And, these women historically have had the greatest ability of any human group on Earth to withstand cold. So that's why they could dive in that water in these little homemade bathing suits that they would sew. But at the first scene, when I was writing the scene where Yongsuk and Mija are going to the port to do the diving this itinerant work for the first time, I just had this thought, well, how did they get from their village to the port?
Right.
I don't know. I mean,
Right.
they didn't have cars, they didn't have buses. Did they take a boat? Did they walk? How did they do it? And so by that time, I now knew a lot of people on Jeju, and I sent some emails, and one of them was to a researcher who had access to an oral history project that was done in the 1970s. And so all of those women that they interviewed back then are gone. But within 24 hours, I had 5 of the transcripts from 5 different women describing the 5 different ways that they had gotten from their villages to the port. And so in that sense, research just continues all the way through, because sometimes when you're writing, it's just like this thought of, oh, wait.
There's another question, yeah.
Yeah, how do you get there?
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this, but I met you several years ago at an event. You were speaking here in San Diego. And at the time, I was just starting to offer personal branding. It's something I thought was really important for authors. And since then, by the way, I use you as an example of a really well-branded author in all the classes I teach. But I remember you saying at the time that you didn't even realize you had a brand, but your publisher did.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if now, are you more aware of your brand these days? And what would you say defines you as a writer?
Well, so that's a word I still struggle with.
The writer or the brand?
The brand, that brand.
Oh, yeah.
I because I just don't see myself that way, because
Right.
then all of a sudden it's like you're a product, or the work is a product. And yes, it is true. I am creating a product, but I don't think of it that way. I just don't. And so but okay. So nevertheless, apparently I do have a brand, and what I am told, and I do think that there's some, I think this is true, that I'm telling stories about women that people haven't necessarily heard before, different cultures, different types of accomplishments, different, the Snowflower and the Secret Snowflower and the Secret Fan, about these writing women in Yunnan province, or women just generally, who had used a secret writing system, the only writing system to have been found anywhere in the world used exclusively by women, and they kept it a secret for 1,000 years. In Peony and Love, the writing women in the mid-17th century in the Yangtze Delta, and how extraordinary they were, not just in China, but in the world at that time, and that we don't really, know much about them, but they were amazing, really amazing. With the Sea Women, the Island of Sea Women, it's the same kind of thing. These free divers from this one island. It's a matrifocal society. So again, trying to tell these stories, and I guess I always say that have been lost, forgotten, or deliberately covered up, about women. And then really tied closely to that is the relationships, the unique relationships that women have. And, mothers and daughters, sisters, friends. And I think particularly friendship is, I would say, people tell me, probably is the most important to them. And so this is a unique relationship that we have in our lives, and it's unlike any other. We'll tell a friend something that we wouldn't tell our mother or our boyfriend or our husband or our lover or our children. It's a very particular kind of intimacy. And whenever you are that vulnerable, you are leaving yourself open to be hurt. And so I would say that I'm interested in sort of the dark shadow side of women's relationships. But is all of that a brand? I don't know. I don't know. I think a brand, you're supposed to be able to say it in a word, right?
Well, yeah. I think that it's different when it comes to an author's brand. What can a reader expect from Lisa C's work? And for me, it's always, deeply researched, lyrical, strong female bonds, and until
You said it much better than I did.
Women. But that's the point that you made when I saw you talk, is that your publisher who was marketing your books, they knew your brand. Mm-hmm. And that's what's important. You write from an authentic place. And so for you, it doesn't feel like a brand because it's just you. Mm-hmm. But that is in and of itself, your voice and the way in which you tell your stories is a brand. I think it's important for authors.
I do think that the part about the history and the research is really important. That
it's really important.
I'm not going to say I haven't made a mistake here and there, but I am so careful. And so I think people trust that what I've written is true. And that is part of why the acknowledgments at the back are so long, but also why I put so much up on my website, is so that people, if they think, oh, did this 4/3 incident actually happen? And then they can go to my website. Yeah. And people do ask me that, like, did that really happen? For different things, and then they can go and look it up, and I'll have as much, I don't want to overwhelm people, but at least it's a starting place. If they want to do more research, they can.
Yeah, and I find that that's very generous of you. Speaking of strong female bonds, I'm curious how your relationships with the women in your life, your mother Carolyn and other women, have seeped into the bonds that you create between your characters.
So my mom was a writer, and I actually have three. Either I'm an only child or I'm one of four, right? So I'm the only child of my mother and father, but I have a former stepsister that we've known each other since we were 3 and 4, a half sister that's my mother's daughter, and a half sister that's my father's daughter. So I think I've got the sister thing down, just having lived it. Yes, I was a daughter, so I definitely lived that. But the thing that to me is sort of interesting is that writing about friendship and these long friendships, Snowflower and the Secret Fan since they're 7. I think also in the Island of Sea Women, they're friends since they're 7. In China Dolls, they all meet when they're about 18. And these are lifelong relationships. And so, why do I write about that? I don't have that. I've never had that experience. But my mother did and my sister did. So Clara, one of my sisters, she's had a best friend since they were 3 months old. And they, both recently turned 50. So this is that's a long time to be best friends. And then my mother had there were 3 of them, these 2 friends that they met in 7th grade, and all the way until my mom passed away, and Joan and Jackie are just still continuing the tradition. So in a way, my not having that was hard on me, because I saw what it was like, with them, with my mom and with my sister Clara. But I also, with a little distance, saw the pros and real cons sometimes.
Right.
And, and over the course of 50 years, or in my mom's case, it was like 70 years that they knew each other. Not everybody was getting along all the time. And they're, like with my mother and one of her friends, they didn't talk for about 20 years, but then, came back together in the last few years. And so to me, all of that is really fascinating. But, I don't have that.
And don't we do that as writers? Like, we create these worlds that we're so fascinated with, or, that they have an effect on us. And I can see how that would play in your
Yeah, and
life,
it's a
watching
kind
your
of
mom.
longing, right? I mean, it's like, well,
Yeah,
I can't
right.
have it in real life, so at least I can have it
I'm
on
going
the
to create it.
page.
Yeah.
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 And I'm going to
Speaking
explore,
of,
like, what would happen, what it would happen if you had
right.
that relationship, and
Yeah. But it's even
the
better 'cause
reality of it.
well, yeah, right. Yeah, and you're right. There's always the pros and cons, and those play well into your stories too. Yeah, I know that
And I also
you've
think, can I just say
spoken.
also I was just going to say, that's also true about emotions too. I think when in a person's writing, that there might be certain emotions that you want to explore, but you can explore it through the writing
Absolutely.
in the same
Yeah.
way that you're exploring a kind of relationship, or maybe a job or a situation that you might not have in your own life, but you are putting yourself in it because you want to explore it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and your character, your readers get to explore that as well through your characters.
Hmm.
I think I've heard you say that your grandmother Stella inspires a lot of your female characters in your books.
Hmm.
Can you speak to your grandmother Stella and how her presence in your life? And actually, did you know Stella?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, yeah, I want to hear more about your grandmother Stella.
So I am a grandmother now, and I think
Congratulations.
how she was with me is sort of what I aspire to. Um, that she and we can't always say this even about our parents or you know other people, but she loved me unconditionally, and I think that's pretty rare in life where we're truly loved unconditionally.
Mm.
And so anyway, my grandmother, she had a pretty hard childhood. She her parents had to get married. They were very young. I'm just going to have to put this out there. They were not good parents. They would just pin like an address on her coat,
Mm.
and then from the time she was 6 years old, and like stick her on a train by herself to go
Whoa.
stay with somebody. So she was
Wow.
really, I mean, out there by herself starting when she was 6. When she was 16, they sent her to Los Angeles to take care of an aunt who was dying of TB. Oh, that's fun for a 16-year-old.
Right.
But she went to art school. She married my grandfather. Of course, he was Chinese, so it was against the law. And
Mm.
they went to Mexico to get married. So she was, I guess the word we would use today is kind of bohemian in some ways, but also very traditional American at the same time. And she loved, and I think, again, because she'd been traveling since she was 6 years old, she loved to travel. And she
Mm.
just, she traveled around the world a couple of times. They had no money. And so maybe that's part of why they would, she would do things like go to India and travel around India in third class. I mean, that's hardcore travel. Anyway, she has appeared in every book. So on Gold Mountain, she's my actual grandmother. In the mysteries that I wrote, she's the neighborhood committee director. In Snowflower and the Secret Fan, she's the matchmaker. In Peony and
Uh-huh.
Love, she's the grandmother. In Shanghai Girls, she's Madame Wu. And then in
Wow.
Dreams of Joy, there's a character whose name I'm not remembering right now, but she's in there. And I could just go through every single one. And
And there she is.
it's not that she
Yeah.
has the same job or looks like my grandmother, but there's certain aspects of her character that I
Mm.
will use.
Mm.
And also, my grandmother could be very cranky. She could be really, she could be pretty harsh. So she wasn't
Mm.
just all lovey dovey at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So but kind of snide in a way, or not snide, that's not but she could say that she could make a sharp remark, let's just say that. And then she also didn't like to go out. And I can remember so many times saying to her, well, you'll have fun once you get there. And she would, she's like, she'd be dragging her, kicking and screaming, but then she'd have fun when she got there. So those are the kinds of things where you can draw on a little, some aspect of a personality. And why that's meant so much to me is she's now been gone for 26 years. Well, that allows me to visit her and be with her while I'm writing.
No, yeah, that's really beautiful. One of the things I love most about you, Lisa, is how incredibly generous you are with your time, specifically to your readers. I mean, you personally respond to every email, as far as I can tell.
I do.
And you you responded to my email. Thank you.
No, I do. Everyone.
Everyone. I mean, that's kind of rare. And, you book clubs either online or even in person, if possible. And
I don't go in person to book clubs anymore, but I do talk to book clubs on Skype, and I talk to book clubs all, literally around the world, and which is one of the fun things that you can do. I mean, I won't get up at 3 a.m. for them. So some places they're
you draw
limited.
The line there.
Yeah, I do draw the line, but I've talked to book clubs in Australia, in Germany, in Israel, once to a book club in Iran. But most of them are here in the U.S. And there was one day last year where I spoke to 4 book clubs in one day.
Wow.
On Skype. Yeah.
That's
awesome.
I
do them by Skype. I mean, it used to be I'd do it on, a conference call, and now everybody does it on Skype. And it's really fun because I'm I'm in the living room with everybody. I mean, there's an aspect to that, where I'm just in the living room with everybody and we're just chatting, and I really enjoy it.
I think that's part of your brand too, your generosity.
Okay.
Coming from a branding person. I wonder, it seems to speak to the exceptional bonds that you create between your characters. It makes sense to me. You seem to care deeply for both your characters and your readers.
Yeah. I don't mean to sound doubtful about that, but I wonder if so let me just rephrase this. My son, when he was in high school, built my website. And the website I have today is just still an ongoing evolution of that original high school project.
Wow. That's awesome.
So it actually was one of the first author websites, but nobody ever looked at it back then. Nobody read my books back then. So I did have a thing where, you could write to me and I might get 2 emails a week. And I was, this is pretty good. I'm getting 2 emails a week. And I do think that when writers are starting out, you've got to try to say yes to everything. And I remember once this is the smallest event I've ever done. I went out to Whittier for On Gold Mountain. And so my first book, it was raining and 4 people showed up. So here's the thing though, that was depressing. I mean, it really was, Whittier's, that's a lot of driving in traffic. And, but I feel like, okay, I came and they came and it's up to me to give it my all. And here's the thing, those 4 people, they still come to events. They still come, they still read my books. They'll write to me now and say, oh, I remember that terrible night. There were only 4 of us. It's like, yes, I'll never forget it. I mean,
thanks for reminding me.
I'll never forget that night. But that you can make a connection to readers. And I think it's so hard to start out. You start from, yes, there are those books where, it's a first book and somebody pays $1 million for it and it's an instant bestseller, and that happens every once in a while. But that's like winning the lottery. that just doesn't happen to the other 180,000 books that are being published every single year. So, it does happen, but everybody else, you're starting from zero, and you just have to go a reader at a time. And so, anyway, so there I was. I had my little website, and people would, I'd get like 2 emails a week, and I would answer them, and then, then I had a thing. Well, oh yes, if they wanted me to come and visit them in their book club, I would drive really a long way to go visit, and you're making a connection with 10 readers, Well, now it's completely different, but it just evolved over time. And so, oh gosh, this morning when I looked, I think I had something like 50 emails on the, the sort of fan email
So
address.
It went from 4 a week to 50
That's
a day.
daunting. I mean, and I don't answer them necessarily all in a day. I can't.
You know what? We lost you for
and so
just
people
a
are
second,
asking
Lisa.
if I can do an event or will I join their book club. But I also get a lot of emails that again go back to the research. How can I find out more? I'm interested in this particular aspect. Where would you send me? I'm in high school, I'm in college, I'm in graduate school, and I'm working on such and such. What advice would you give me? Lots of email like that.
Nice.
And then also people sharing their personal stories. And, they're different. Obviously, those kinds of letters are going to be different depending on the book. So with Snowflower and the Secret Fan, for example, so many people wrote to me about how they had a best friend and then what happened and how they, hadn't spoken in 40 years. And was there a way that you could actually try to get, rekindle the friendship? I mean, I can't tell you how many emails like that I've had over the years. With Tea-Girl of Hummingbird Lane, because that's about, a lot of it is about adoption from China. Lots and lots of emails from either people who have adopted from China or people who are thinking about adopting from China, the relatives of people who've adopted from China, and then a lot of email from young women who were adopted from China, saying this is the first book that I've read that really reflects my own experience. I didn't know how to put this into words, but you did it, and then how did you do that? And are there any does this organization that you wrote about, does that actually exist? And how can I find it? So those kinds of things. And then now with Island of Sea Women, a very, again, very different kind set of email, which is mostly from Korean Americans and also people in Korea, because the book has been published there, that have to do with the history of this island. And because the so-called 4/3 incident was kept a secret for 50 years, even people who grew up in Korea never heard of it. So, earlier when we were talking about, when people say, did this really happen? Even people who were, lived there didn't know, not on the island. People who lived on the island knew what happened, but, even on mainland Korea didn't know that it had happened because there was so much propaganda built up around the idea that this was just a hoax. And so, so a good part of that is like, did that really happen? And how can I find out more? And then the other part of that set of email is, I was from there. This is what happened to my family.
Oh, wow.
And so, I think every book just has this, people respond to something that I can't necessarily anticipate. But and just one last thing about the email. I know I'm going on a long time about this.
No, it's great.
But, there's something weird about the internet in the sense that you put stuff out there and I don't think you necessarily think someone's going to read it. So people will really just like open their hearts and share unbelievable stuff with me in their emails. But I think it's because they don't think I'm really going to read it. They just think they're sending
Right.
it
You may
somewhere.
be right. Yeah.
And then when I write back, people say, "I didn't
They're
think
shocked.
you were going to read this." And I really didn't think you were going to respond. So,
And certainly don't put it in a book.
Well,
and actually, just the other day, and now, and then sometimes I respond, and then now all of a sudden you're having a long conversation for sometimes like a week, and sometimes for years. And a woman, so in the Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, I write about a concept that the medical profession has come up with to label not all, but some girls who were adopted from China, which is grateful but angry. And this woman wrote and said, that you've used a term. I understand it's really about adoption, but I understand it, and it's just given me the words for something that I've been experiencing myself. And she has colon cancer, and so she was grateful for her doctors, but she's so angry at the same time. And so we've just we've been writing back and forth, and I don't know, I feel I'm so grateful that people want to tell me things, and that something in my work has inspired them to reach out, because that takes a lot. You have to go look it up and think about what you're going to say. I mean, I don't know. I just feel really honored by that.
That's beautiful. What are you most proud of in your work?
Oh, that was a groan. Oh, I do. For me, what I'm most proud of course, if you ask me tomorrow, I might say something different. But I think it is the history and the research that I've done. And the reason I'm saying that today is this last weekend, I spoke at the California Antiquarian Book Fair, where I was on a panel about the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote. And one of the women there is she's now retired, but a professor from UCLA. And she said to me, "You are such an incredible historian." And I teared up. And the reason is when my mother was a PhD, my mother and my father, my stepfather, my stepmother, there's a second stepmother, my second stepfather, all of them had PhDs. And so when I was young, there was I did go to college, but there was a fair amount of pressure to like keep going and get your PhD, because like that's what we all do. And I was like, I would never do that. I'm not academic. I'm just not that good at school. That's just not for me. And yet, and then there was a time when my mom said to me, you turned out to be the most academic of all of us.
Right.
And so when this woman said that the other day, it's like one thing for your mom to say it, but for a woman that you really, and I did love and admire my mother, but for a woman who was like not my mother, but highly respected historian, to say that to me, that's why I kind of teared up. So that's why I'm answering today. If you call me tomorrow, well, I'll come up with I'm sure I'll have a whole other response.
And that's totally fair. Well, and by the same token, what has your biggest challenge been in your writing career?
Well, I think it depends on when it was, what year I was in of it. So I have written different types of books. And the first book, nonfiction about my family, then the 3 mystery thrillers. And those books, they always called me a critically acclaimed author. And what that means is you get really great reviews, but nobody reads your books. Okay, so I was a critically acclaimed author. And then when I started Snowflower and the Secret Fan, everyone told me no one's going to read that book. I mean, everyone. My agent, my editor, my publisher, my mother, other writers, they were just like, no one's going to read that book. It takes place in the past. It takes place in China. It's about women. It's about women's friendship. Nobody's going to read it. Nobody wants to know about it. And
did they realize they were throwing fuel on the fire?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Actually, it wasn't that. It was more like, well, okay, so no one's going to read it. I don't have to think about who's going to read it. And so since no one's going to read it, I'm just going to truly, truly write the book I want. And I just really didn't think at all about the audience. Not that I ever thought that much about it, but I obviously must have thought about it more because I really made this very deliberate decision at the time. And so I really went deep inside me to write that in a way that you wouldn't necessarily with a mystery, right? So, of course, everyone turned out to be wrong. And that book was, like a really huge international bestseller. And it changed my life. I feel like I'm so fortunate that happened to me on my fifth book and not my first. For some of the things we've been talking about, that I just don't even I can contemplate what that would be like, but I can't see living it and having the respect for the readers and just again all the things we've already been talking about. So the thing is, I did have this feeling when I was writing it, like, okay, I know how many books, the mysteries sell. So I know I won't get to that number, but maybe it'll just be 5,000 people. Maybe 5,000 people will buy this book, and they're going to be the right 5,000 people. And I just think that when I sort of let go of the market, maybe I don't even know how to describe, like publishing and all the other concerns one has, and just went deep. And so that success, for me anyway, made me want to go deeper. Made me want to, again, sort of cut to the bone, to try to go deeper, to look at relationships, to look at emotions, to look at these particular moments in history or culture. And that I should always think, well, maybe only 5,000 people will buy it, but they'll be the right 5,000. Because that's what you want. You don't, I've been obviously extraordinarily lucky and to have the career that I have now, and that lots and lots of people buy my books and read them. I understand that, and I'm really, really grateful for it. But when I sit down to write, I can't think about all those people. I just have to go inside me, inside myself. And sometimes people will ask me, like, what do you want the reader to get out of this? What do you want? And that comes up. That's a question that comes up a lot. And it's like, I'm sorry, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I don't care. I'm really thinking about, this is like a personal journey for me.
Sure.
And I'm not sorry, but I'm not thinking about the reader when I'm writing. I'm thinking about where I want to go and what I want to discover. And it's, going back to what you said earlier when about, do you want to explore a particular kind of relationship or a particular emotion? That's where I'm going. That has nothing to do with the reader. That just is my personal journey. And that's why I just think, I hope some people want to come along for the ride with me.
Yeah. And people trust that you will take them on that ride.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it. It's been really lovely just hearing about your process, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
You can learn more about Lisa at her website, lisasee.com. That's LISASEE.com. And you can follow her on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll include the links on the website. You can buy The Island of Sea Women, which is available in paperback everywhere books are sold on March 10th. Be sure to follow and rate The Premise wherever you get your podcasts. Until next week, thanks for joining us.
Are you an author with a story to tell, but you're just not sure how to get that story out?
Guess what? You don't have to do it alone. Marnie Friedman is an incredible writing coach. She offers personalized support and expertise to guide you from a kernel of an idea to completion. Visit marniefriedman.com to learn more. That's MarniFreedman.com.
This episode is brought to you by Monkey See Media, a small boutique design firm offering award-winning websites, book cover designs, book trailers, and photography services.
And full disclosure, we love what we do. Chad and I founded Monkey See Media in 2004, and we're still going strong.
Visit monkeyseemedia.com. That's MONKEY, the letter C, media.com to see how we can help you promote your book, build a powerful online presence.
What else you got, Chad?
Let's see. We've got the San Diego Writers Festival. There are many writers. And they're a proud sponsor of our Premise podcast as well.
And it's going to be awesome. This year's keynote is Scott Gimple. He's the head writer of The Walking Dead. And the festival is free. It's open to the public. There's going to be educational panels and workshops, famous authors, up-and-coming authors, kids and teen programming, and live theater performances. Oh, and there's music. Oh, and there's food.
Oh, but wait, there's more. You also get a copy of our home game.
You're silly. But wait, there is more. There will be literary agents taking pitches from authors looking to get their books published. The festival is about building community and celebrating storytelling of all kinds. It's happening April 4th, 2020 at the Coronado Public Library.